Hello and welcome to the main edition of World News here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Will Germany reduce financial support for Ukraine due to budget cuts that some have called necessary? And how will that affect Ukraine's defensive war? This and much more coming right up. But first, the headlines. Russian troops have attacked Ukrainian positions 139 times during the day. So far, Putin's army has failed to break through the front lines. Donald Trump steps up verbal attacks on Kamala Harris, and he's losing in the polls. Franek Smuda has passed away. He was one of the most decorated Polish national team coaches in history. Germany seems to be ending military aid for Ukraine. This is according to information shared by German media, as there has currently been no official statement on the matter from the German government. Germany has so far been a very important donor of aid for the Ukrainian defense effort.
Germany has been at the forefront of aid for Ukraine amid the Russian invasion. As of now, the value of military, financial and humanitarian support that Germany has given Ukraine amounts to 14.7 billion euros, second only to the United States. Now, it seems that the German aid effort is losing its momentum. The country tightens its purse strings, fueling disgruntlement in the West. Like in this tweet by Jakub Janda, the director of a US think tank, Center for Security Policy.
Germany has first cut its 2025 aid for Ukraine in half. Now it stops any new assistance to Ukraine from using German federal budget. It was Germany who appeased Russia for so long, which made Putin think attacking Ukraine will be okay. Now Germany keeps betraying Ukrainian defenders. What would you expect from a state which did Nord Stream 1 and 2 to increase European dependence on Russian dictatorship?
The decision is seen as a misinterpretation of the war, according to Berlin-based NGO Vitsche, which comprises a group of Ukrainian activists.
Germany has to understand that because people start to fade in it, way like war seems not reachable, but war is literally next door, and Germany is not an island somewhere in the middle of nowhere. We are so much connected here to each other in Europe.
The move might come as a surprise to many, given that only last month German Chancellor Scholz promised that aid for Ukraine would not decline.
Ukraine can count on our solidarity. Putin cannot count on our solidarity and support waning as a result of the fiscal problems of individual countries or because of the fact that political will may not always be the same everywhere.
But even in Germany, many politicians believe it's a mistake to make Putin think the aid for Ukraine will wane.
It's on symbolic level a problem because in the first it looks like that Germany is halving its support for Ukraine when it comes to money. In the end, I'm sure we will not do this, but in the moment it looks like that Germany will do it, and that's a problem.
Despite contradicting views among German politicians, public support for the Ukrainian cause has been slipping. According to a survey released in June, 42% of Germans believe their country has done too much for Ukrainian refugees.
The Ukrainian offensive in Kursk was enabled by Western nations permitting the use of most of the arms that they had provided against Russian territory. Now Kyiv is lobbying for the removal of the last of such restrictions, which are still preventing Ukraine from using long-range missiles within Russia.
The Ukrainian government is pushing for permission to use British Storm Shadow and American ATACMS missiles against Russian territory. According to The Times, London is willing to grant such permission for the weapons it has provided, but it is still awaiting Washington's approval. The US is also reportedly considering providing Ukraine with JASSM missiles, similar in their capabilities to Storm Shadow.
We are doing everything possible to provide our soldiers with the necessary weapons and reinforcements. In this context, it is crucial that our partners remove barriers that prevent us from weakening Russian positions in the way the course of the war demands. Long-range capabilities for our forces are the answer to the most important and strategic questions of this war. The bravery of our soldiers and the resilience of our combat brigades are currently compensating for the lack of necessary decisions from our partners.
Ukraine has been carrying out a campaign of long-range strikes against Russian bases, targeting primarily oil depots as well as air bases. These are conducted using slow-moving drones, which often gives the Russians enough warning time to move aircraft away from the sites about to be struck. Fast-moving, low-observably cruise missiles would allow for strikes against parked aircraft on the ground. Degrading the Russian Air Force's ability to carry out strikes has been vital to the Ukrainian operation in Kursk. Ukrainian troops have been continuing their advance into Russia, destroying another key bridge and attempting to isolate and encircle Russian units. Their success has led the Belarusian government to redeploy its forces.
There are over 120,000 Ukrainian troops on the Belarusian-Ukrainian border. They are keeping them near our border. Seeing their aggressive policy, we have introduced there and placed in certain points, in case of war, there would be defense, our military along the entire border.
While Ukrainian troops are seeing successes in the Kursk region, Russia is still continuing its offensive in the Donbas. Russian troops have captured the village of Sviridonivka, bringing them closer to the key town of Pokrovsk. Taking Pokrovsk would leave the rear and flanks of Ukrainian troop divisions defending the other parts of the Donetsk region dangerously exposed. While the Ukrainian operation in Kursk forced Russia to redirect forces away from the Donbas, it has not derailed the Russian offensive entirely. Moscow is also using second-rate troops to defend Kursk, including conscripts. Additionally, Russia has announced the formation of infantry units composed of former Air Force personnel, which will be used to defend Kursk. This suggests that the Air Force lost so many aircraft that much of the ground personnel has been rendered redundant. A similar situation occurred during World War II, when the destruction of Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine assets led to sailors and airmen being sent to the front lines.
The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has called on Russia and Ukraine to exercise maximum restraint over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Moscow claims that Ukraine has attacked a road near the facility. The authorities in Kyiv have called the accusations a wave of crazy Russian propaganda. We're now going to Kyiv, where our correspondent Oz Chatterjee has the latest insights into the situation. Hi Oz, what do we know?
Well, we only know really what the claim is from Moscow, but it should be said that Moscow's been making these same claims basically pretty much ever since they seized control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And it also needs to be said, Moscow has never once provided any evidence to suggest the Ukrainians are shelling their own nuclear power plant. So today, the claim is from yesterday that a drone yesterday hit one of the sites on the nuclear power plant facility, which the IEA have inspected, and the Director General, Rafael Grossi, has released a statement today calling for maximum restraint on all sides. But the key thing is, saying that is as if Ukraine is firing missiles or drones towards the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And we only really have Russia's word for this, and they have presented precisely zero evidence to stack up these claims. So while the IEA are in the ground and they are monitoring the situation and talking about the situation deteriorating, or nuclear safety deteriorating around the plant, it should be said again that Moscow's presented no evidence to suggest that Ukraine has fired any missiles or drones towards the nuclear power plant, and they may well be staging these attacks themselves.
Tends to hold on until more evidence is available. Thank you, Oz, for the update, and stay safe. The US presidential race is picking up speed. Both candidates have held election rallies in the last 2 days, with former President Donald Trump issuing personal attacks at his opponent Kamala Harris. The current vice president instead focused more on the economy. Donald Trump's personal attacks have been worsening his polling, while Kamala Harris has been gaining ground.
During his Saturday rally in Pennsylvania, former President Donald Trump kept things rather personal.
Look, people say, be nice. Have you heard her laugh? That is the laugh of a crazy person. That is the laugh of a crazy. It's the laugh of a lunatic. But I say that I am much better looking than her. I think I'm much better. Much better. I'm a better looking person than Kamala. Kamala went full communist. You heard that? She went full communist. She wants to destroy our country.
Just a day prior, Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to her supporters in North Carolina about her plans for the economy. Rising inflation and high costs of living are some of the most important issues for American voters.
Under my plan, more than 100 million Americans will get a tax cut, and we will do this by restoring 2 tax cuts designed to help middle-class and working Americans. The Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit.
Appealing to middle-class voters is one of the bigger challenges for both candidates. Since she joined the presidential race, Kamala Harris managed to take the lead in the latest polls in 3 of the battleground states: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But the biggest unknown in these elections is whether the 2 candidates are able to convince the undecided. Professor Scott Lucas from the University College Dublin believes Donald Trump is behind in this regard.
It's not the loyalists that decide the elections. It's those voters who haven't yet decided. You know, Donald Trump almost immediately thought, well, I can do the same thing I did in 2016, and I can insult Kamala Harris like I did Hillary Clinton. Well, no, that might support or might get support for your base, but it doesn't actually get to those people who are looking for something different.
Yet the latest polls gathered by the New York Times still show the 2 candidates going neck and neck. The November election will likely go down to the wire. Kamala Harris is to be officially pronounced the Democratic candidate at the upcoming National Democratic Convention on Thursday.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said his government is working hard to secure the release of hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel today to secure the ceasefire for which many parties have been pushing.
The deal between Israel and Hamas is taking longer than expected, as both sides find it difficult to come to an understanding.
We are holding very complex negotiations in which the other side is a murderous terrorist organization that is unbridled and obstinate. However, I would like to emphasize, we are conducting negotiations and not a scenario in which we just give and give.
Every day the deal is not finalized, families of the kidnapped hostages grow increasingly worried for the well-being of their loved ones. Dozens of them took to the streets of Tel Aviv on Saturday to express their dissatisfaction with the government.
We learned from past experience that not to build the expectation too much, because then if it doesn't complete to a deal, the disappointment is so huge and you go down so far that it's very hard to rise up again.
After 2 days of negotiations, the deal still hasn't been secured. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken set off to Israel late Saturday to make sure it is finalized. According to Israeli officials, more than 100 hostages remain in Hamas captivity. It is unclear how many of them are still alive. More than 250 people were kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. The brutal attack sparked a bloody conflict, which is already in its 10th month and has seen Israeli forces kill thousands of Palestinians, including women and children.
One of Poland's most famous football coaches, Franek Smuda, has passed away at the age of 76. Smuda had been battling blood cancer for a very long time. A few days ago, it was said that he was in critical condition. Unfortunately, the doctors were unable to save him.
His biggest success dates back to the late 90s when he claimed 3 league championships with Widzew Łódź and Wisła Kraków. The peak of his career came in 2009 when he took the helm of the Poland national team ahead of the 2012 Euro Championship hosted by Poland and Ukraine. Former Polish football player Grzegorz Mielcarski said the coach made a huge impression on him and his teammates.
I remember those days. I was 23 years old, and he had such a motivating influence on us. He was able to wring things out of us that we may not have been able to do before. He had such a way with footballers, such directness.
He was deemed one of the most colourful figures on the Polish football scene, known for his blunt remarks and for being overly set in his ways.
One of his assistants before the game versus Greece in Euro 2012 prepared a very big report about Greece, and he looked at the first page of this report and said, they don't playing anything. We'll beat them 5-0. Unfortunately, they didn't.
But his contribution to football in Poland is not limited to anecdotes and stories. He also left his mark on the sport as a whole.
He was one of those coaches who you could say introduced this form of pressing from the German league to Poland, as it was adopted here thanks to Franciszek Smuda.
Apart from Widzew Łódź and Wisła Kraków, Smuda coached several other big clubs in Poland, including Legia Warsaw and Lech Poznań. Each of today and tomorrow's games of Poland's top-tier league, the Ekstraklasa, will be preceded by a minute of silence in commemoration of Smuda.
Thailand has the youngest prime minister in the country's history. Her father was prime minister, so was her aunt. The new head of government faces enormous economic and geopolitical challenges. Her predecessor was dismissed by the Constitutional Court for gross ethics violations.
Thailand's newest prime minister is also the country's youngest. Paetongtarn Shinawat's appointment was confirmed today, just a few days before her 38th birthday.
I am dedicated to pushing forward key policies, from economic reforms and the 30 baht healthcare improvements to enhancing digital infrastructure and promoting Thailand's soft power on the global stage.
During her first press conference as Prime Minister, Shinawat indicated her desire to improve ties with China. In recent years, Thailand's usually close ties with the West have become supplanted by tightening relations with Beijing.
Thailand and China, we have a good relationship for a long, long time. Every time that I have a chance to meet with all the leaders from China, we all got a very warm welcome. Of course, we hope to do more with China as well.
Shinawat was appointed Prime Minister by the ruling coalition after her predecessor, Srettha Thavisin, was removed from the office by the Constitutional Court. Thavisin appointed a person previously convicted of attempting to bribe the Constitutional Court's judges as his advisor. This was determined by the court to be a gross violation of ethics, which warranted his dismissal. Shinawat is the daughter of former Thai Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawat. She has emphasized her intention to remain independent of his influence.
I hope I can ask him for advice anytime that I want, but not all the time, 24/7 like that, because it's not possible. So I am my own person, and I have my own things and my own goals that I have to be achieved in the future. But of course, all the comments from him value to me, and yes, I just wish that I could work with everybody, and including my dad as well.
The Shinawatra family has been, in one way, very successful in Thai politics. Paetongtarn Shinawatra is the third member of her family to serve as prime minister. In another way, the Shinawats have been rather unsuccessful. Thaksin Shinawatra, Paetongtarn's father, served as prime minister for 5 years but was deposed in a coup in 2006. Yingluck Shinawatra, Paetongtarn's aunt, served for 3 years before being removed from office by the Constitutional Court in 2014, with another coup following shortly after. The parliamentary coalition which voted for Paetongtarn Shinawatra to become prime minister includes parties backed by the Thai military, which should shield her from a coup, at least for the time being.
Go back to Germany now. According to German newspaper Faz Daily, the current and future German national budgets do not include any new funds for aid to Ukraine. The reason given is the spending cuts ordered by the Chancellor's office and the Ministry of Finance. According to the Daily, critical voices regarding the government's decision can be heard both within the government coalition and in the opposition CDU and CSU. Next year, Ukraine's situation is expected to deteriorate even further. We'll discuss this matter right now with my guests, Mark McNamee. He's the co-founder of the Ukraine Business News Network, and we're expecting journalist Joe Harper to join us once the technology works as it should. In the meantime, Mr. McNamee, welcome to TVP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, sir. So tell me, Germany was the biggest contributor to Ukraine in Europe. What does this mean for Ukraine, but also for other countries in Europe? Do they need to step up?
Well, most definitely, they need to step up. I mean, just mathematically speaking, this does leave a bit of a hole. I wouldn't overplay how bad this is. I think at this point, especially since the final budget is not concluded yet, we shouldn't get too nervous about this, but it is, of course, worth discussing. $8 billion was the hope that Ukraine would get for next year from Germany, and they cut that in half to 4. The defense minister talking about 6. So yes, what other countries have to step up, most definitely. And for Ukraine, of course, all we've been seeing and hearing for the last about year now are these potential cuts, delays, the U.S. potentially abandoning Ukraine, on top of not just Germany, but other European countries threatening to withhold aid. So, of course, this is just part of that continued negative narrative, which, of course, makes Ukraine worried. And also Ukraine, actually, with the defense spending they're going through this year, does have additional needs and will see continued needs for external support at the next year at the level of this year. So, look, at the end of the day, it's concerning. It's just that we're far from a disaster situation still, and there are months ahead of us where this can get rectified.
Understood. And as you say, much of this is rhetoric. Not all of this has been confirmed. It is at the moment just hearsay, is it not?
More or less. And don't forget, Germany, a lot of this is pre-election pandering, right? They are supposed to formally, constitutionally, hold their next elections in about a year from now, September 2025. You have a coalition that is being still held together relatively loosely. The majority party in the coalition in particular losing a considerable amount of support. So you have to consider the domestic audience. All 3 members of the coalition are pandering to their domestic audience. Obviously, you have economic duress within Germany, so it makes it a hard sell to say we're diverting billions of euros to Ukraine outside of Germany, of course. So yes, I mean there's a lot. I mean, we need to take into account the political dimensions domestically within Germany, and also not panic quite yet. The budget is typically in Germany, typically finalized in November, so we have a few months ahead of us. And most critically, even the finance minister, Lindner, mentioned that basically that $4 billion hole, they're hoping that it's then, instead of being taken from the German budget, taken instead from the planned $50 billion loan that's supposed to come from Russia's, the interest on Russia's underlying foreign exchange reserve assets. So if that comes through, that's obviously a far larger number and has much much more important long-term implications. So we should be watching that more, and progress on that being dispersed closer than we should be watching a couple $1 billion here directly from the German budget.
Understood. Thank you for that, Mark. Joe Harper, welcome. Delighted you were able to overcome the technical challenges. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
OK, so Germany has been criticised quite a lot, has it not, Joe, since the beginning for its sluggishness. How is this going to influence the reputation, if you like, the public image of Germany, both among the Russian government, for example, but also amongst European allies?
I think the German, the opinion amongst its allies probably hasn't changed that much. You know, there's always been a tendency to think of the Germans as being probably a bit closer to the Russians than others would have liked. They obviously made the pivot 2 years ago. Scholz decided to fundamentally change German policy, but there is a sense, I suspect, that this process that's happening at the moment, connected to Nord Stream, also the allegations of a Ukrainian connection to the Nord Stream sabotage, and also various other things internally, domestic politics in Germany going on. I suspect that there is a little bit of foot dragging going on in terms of how the Kremlin sees Russia. You know, we can only speculate, I guess.
Is this good news for Putin, Mark?
Absolutely. This is exactly the signal he wants to receive, is that there's a lack of resilience on the part of Ukraine's partners, which then Putin smells the weakness. That is exactly what he wants to continue to see. And yeah, so that's the biggest problem, is that we're sending a very wrong signal. In the same way the U.S. delays in aid at the beginning of the year. In the end, they end up supporting it, but by late April. So the money comes extremely late. The narrative, unfortunately, had already taken hold for 6 months prior, and that sent exactly the message that the Kremlin wanted to hear. Similar to what's going on right now. So it's unfortunate, but it just imbues the Kremlin with more confidence.
Understood. Now, Joe, we just heard what Mark had to say, and I think Germany isn't alone in Europe. That, you know, of the countries that are giving Putin some measure of pleasure, if you like, Hungary comes to mind, and Slovakia. Are we seeing a rift in the attitude towards Ukraine coming up in Europe?
I think we saw. The answer is probably no. I mean, the simple answer is I don't think so. No. I mean, I think NATO is pretty well has shown a very united front so far. You know, the money is still online to be delivered, weaponry delivered also to Ukraine. So no, I don't think so. I mean, I suspect that there are certain domestic issues within Germany in relation to this specific case. Hungary, Slovakia is a very small player. Hungary has the capacity to be a spanner in the works, but it's still incumbent to the European Union to a large extent in terms of its you know, its income from EU funds and so on. So no, I mean, I suspect it's got something to do in the German case with the elections which are coming up in these 3 state elections coming up in September. And it may also be connected to, you know, certain behind-the-scenes talks going on, presumably between Berlin and Kiev over Nord Stream. Yeah, the gas pipeline, which was sabotaged. So I don't think there's any reason to believe this is more than, you know, a kind of superficial scar, as it were.
A blip along the way. Very briefly, and I'll stay with you on this one, Joe, because Mark has already addressed it. Frozen Russian assets, the interest of which $50 billion should, you know, many countries are saying should be passed to Ukraine to help with their defence and rebuilding efforts. Your view on that, on the likelihood of that actually happening?
Well, it's quite complex financial procedure, I guess. I mean, we're talking about $300 billion dollars, US dollars, locked up somewhere. Question is who has access to that and who, what would be the mechanics of delivering that? I guess. I mean, in terms of the German capacity to unlock those funds, I would imagine they have the political will to do that, and there will be some of that unlocked. The question is, I don't think it'll be 300 billion.
Yeah.
50 billion is quite optimistic as well, I would imagine.
Right. Well, we shall see. Of course, there are the legal issues to take into account as well. Joe, Mark, thank you both very much for joining us. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. And that's all from us in this main edition. Good night.